All right. It's about 3 minutes after, according to my clock. So again, welcome. This is Kim Burnett with Shadhika. I'm the president and CEO, and I'm delighted to have you all join us today. Um, this is, uh, as I said, you're going to be on mute until the end of the presentations. But if you have a question while we're talking, you have a chat box in your little control panel. And if you want to type in your question there or comment or anything else you may need, we'll be sure to factor in those questions and get them answered for you. I think we have one more person joining and then we'll get going. All right. So today's conversation is with Alan Steinman, who's a principal of tax practice at Bader and Martin. And Alan, one of his specialties is working with donors and family foundations, and is on a lot of boards and has been involved in advising his clients on investments for their philanthropic dollars. So we thought we'd bring him in here to talk a little bit about best practices among nonprofits in general. And then I'll be talking more specifically about kind of what's been happening, as we say, where does the money go when you make a donation to Shadhika, and how we've been growing over the years and the impact that we're having. So this is really a time for you to really understand the power of your investment in our work and the difference it's making in the lives of the young women and the young men that we serve. So this is one of quarterly webinars that we do throughout the year. Our next webinar, just to plug that, it will be in November, and it will be focused on violence against women or gender-based violence. As you know, India was recently voted, unfortunately, to be one of the most dangerous places in the world for a woman. And so we will have outside international experts on the line with us to talk about gender-based violence globally, and then in India specifically. And then we'll look a little bit about what Shadhika has been doing to address that. The other thing, just to forecast, looking forward into 2019, we will hopefully be having these kinds of what we're calling our investor relations calls on a quarterly basis. So just like a for-profit organization has quarterly stakeholder calls, we think as a nonprofit we should offer up the same. So be looking for that. And again, it's just part of our desire to be as transparent with you and accountable to you as donors with what we do with your resources. So today we're going to start with Alan giving just a primer on how to read audited financial statements, in case some of you are not really familiar with them. Kind of financial statements for nonprofits look a little bit different maybe than for-profit organizations, so he'll walk us through that. And then he'll talk a little bit about how he advises his clients to think about assessing a nonprofit's impact. And then from there, I will talk about Shadhika's work and the impact we've been having, and then give you a little bit of forecasting into what we're looking to do going forward as Shadhika grows. And then finally, we'll end with a Q&A. Before we get started, I did want to share a few of the questions that some of you had sent around, and we're going to try to make sure we answer those questions today. So really, the questions were, what do we spend our money on? And how does that compare to other nonprofits? Whether we have costs that are higher or lower than other nonprofits, and why, and what we're doing to address those challenges. Costs that we may see increasing in the future, and what those could be and what our plan is for that. And then this one, which is a very kind of gets to the heart of our work, is if miraculously $100,000 fell out of the sky tomorrow, how would Shadhika make a decision about how to allocate those dollars? And amongst all of the different choices. So we'll try to make sure we answer that. And then finally, how does Shadhika measure our success in terms of our programs that we invest in? So if you have any other questions, feel free to add those to the list, but I think those will be the ones we'll try to focus on today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan to walk us through a primer on audited financials.
Good afternoon, everyone. I thought I would just start with kind of the basic building blocks regarding, what an audited financial statement is. We report our financial statements on a GAAP basis, which means we use the accrual basis of accounting. So we recognize it's more based on the economics and the actual flow of cash. So we recognize income when when a pledge is recorded or made, not necessarily when it's paid. And we recognize our main expense being grants that we make. We book that expense at the point that we make the grant. And even if it's a multi-year grant, as long as there aren't additional conditions in the future, we'll record the entire liability at the point the grant is made. So that's the basis of an accrual financial statement. It doesn't relate to when we pay bills or when the cash comes in. It's when the economics drive the recording of the accounting. The key measure that you look at when you look at a financial statement is you try to look at what the net assets are of the organization, and that's our assets less our liabilities. And in the nonprofit world, it's a little different because those net assets are divided into buckets. And there are 3 buckets. However, Shadhika only has 2 of them, and that is temporarily restricted funds. So those are funds that we've received that either due to time or purpose are not available to be spent yet. And then we have unrestricted assets, which are assets that the board can deploy in any way they wish. Just as a heads up, starting in 2018, these classifications are going to be changed as GAAP is changing for nonprofit organizations. And it's going to be simpler, where we're just going to have 2 buckets. We're going to have net assets with donor restrictions, and those restrictions will be as to purpose or time. And then we'll have a bucket of without donor restrictions, which if the board designates funds, this is even if the board restricts funds, they will still be under without donor restrictions category. So that's the basis of our audited financial statements. One of the things that we do, and it's gained a lot of focus over time, is our functional classification of expenses. This is where we break our expenses down to programming, management in general, and fundraising. The difficulty in these allocations are there are no exact guidelines as to how we fit things into these 3 categories. And thus, the comparability of these functional expenses across the not-for-profit world has a lot of arbitrariness to it. Most people tend to follow the instructions in the IRS 990 form, which has required this classification of years, but there's a lot of art to this, and there's not a science, and thus it makes it very hard to compare nonprofit to nonprofit. So I'll come back to this when we talk about Shadhika in particular and how we're utilizing our money, but keep that in mind that this is an estimate. When you have your financial statements audited, which Shadhika has now had done, what you're doing is you're asking an outside accounting firm to present an opinion as to whether the financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with GAAP. And what the auditor's really doing is they're using analytics, sampling, third-party verification, analysis of risks, looking at internal controls to determine whether the financial statements are fairly stated. And if after using these techniques, they'll then state their opinion. And in this past year, the outside auditor was able to say in their opinion that these statements were fairly presented in accordance with GAAP. And the key for the accounting system is just to make sure that management controls and oversight are probably the most important factors in reaching this, what I'll call a clean audit opinion. So in assessing the impact of not-for-profits, what are the key metrics, and what should donors be looking at in determining the effectiveness of the organization? I believe that probably the most important thing is the dashboard, which Kim has helped develop in this organization. So you're looking at what your mission is and what are the key indicators that you're trying to measure. And to me, that is the most effective thing to try to see whether a not-for-profit is meeting its mission. During 2017, the audited financial statements broke your expenses out between programming, management in general, and fundraising into 76% of the funds spent were designated as programming expenses, 7% were management in general, and 17% were fundraising. So going back to what I stated earlier in the arbitrary nature of all of this, how does that compare to the rest of the not-for-profit world? Well, hard to say. But what I can tell you is there is probably a 20% underreporting of overhead in the not-for-profit world generally, because everybody is driven to, under donor pressures and just comparison purposes, they want to show the lowest management and overhead expenses and fundraising as possible. So where studies have been done, the average underreporting seems to be somewhere in the 20% category. The average nonprofit, which we're not the average, but the average nonprofit in the last comprehensive study reflected overhead expenses and fundraising totaling almost 37%. We're below that threshold. But I like to look at overhead really as infrastructure expenses. And organizations that really drive the lowest overhead costs sometimes create terrible infrastructures for their entities, and thus sustainability is lacking in these organizations. So it's really important that the infrastructure exists in order for the organization to carry on its mission. And so, well, what do we do then in order to ensure that we're not overspending on our infrastructure? Our largest expense in most entities tend to be salaries of executive directors and key staff. And we can get some assurance in that area. And best practices now is pretty much to look at doing a salary survey in your market every few years. And that will give the board and donors some assurance that you're kind of in the ballpark regarding the most significant expense that a nonprofit has. And I know the nonprofits I've served on, we tend to use about a 3-year cycle of doing salary surveys that are really tailored to our market to give us confidence that our organizations are kind of in the ballpark. We're either underpaying or overpaying, but you need to know that as a board. And sometimes, in order to accomplish your mission, having a stronger infrastructure is a good thing, because to the extent we lack good overhead investments in systems, key talent, IT training, we are jeopardizing and we're not as effective in accomplishing our mission. So that is kind of the 30,000-foot overview of things I look at when I'm trying to evaluate a not-for-profit.
Great. Thank you, Alan. If anybody has any questions for Alan, feel free again to put those in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to move on, kind of building on what he said, and let's talk about how we assess Shadhika's impact. So Shadhika, for many of you that are on the call, you may or may not know, I joined Shadhika in 2013. Shadhika was actually incorporated in 1993, but the revenues that we have demonstrated here are basically the revenues since 2013. Actually, I joined in 2014, excuse me, the year before I came on board to today. And the reason why we're kind of marking it that way is before I came on board, Shadhika was run by, as some of you again may know, my mother-in-law and father-in-law. And really, they had an event in their backyard once a year. It happened to be that in 2013 was their 20th anniversary. So they actually had a big gala that year, and they raised about over $100,000. That was the first time that they'd ever raised more than $100,000. And then as you see in time, we've been steadily increasing our revenues since last year at our 25th anniversary, where we raised over $500,000. So that's a pretty remarkable increase. And part of that is because we went from really one event a year to a nationwide organization that has multiple fundraising activities and is building grant relationships with foundations and donor advised funds, and really expanding our footprint in terms of fundraising from being just a small backyard event at a home in Palo Alto to a national organization. So that's over a 300% increase in in about 5 years. So in terms of spending, as Alan said, we've really strived to keep allocate a lot of our expenses to programs. As I've said to some of you before, Shadhika really does two things: we raise money and we give it away. And at the end of the day, we try to have as much of our spending go to support our programs. Now that includes both grant making as well as research, as well as evaluation, as well as staffing of those expenses. So it's not just our grant making dollars, but it's also everything that goes into making sure that we are carrying out due diligence on our projects, that they're doing what they say they should be doing. They say they would be doing with our money, to just giving the grant dollars. And while we've done that, we've tried to keep our fundraising and our management low. And again, I think there is a reverse incentive, incentive is not the right word, but I mean that nonprofits are often told that they cannot spend more than a certain amount on their management and fundraising, and so that has driven a lot of our thinking of our allocation. But even that said, you'll see we have expanded the amount of money we've spent in management in general over the years as we've begun to grow. And I would say one of the things that our organization and our board has really focused on in the last 5 years is taking an organization that was really volunteer driven, and growing the infrastructure we need to be accountable and to be able to deliver on the kinds of programs that we want to in a responsible way. In terms of our program support, this is the allocation across all of our programs from 2013 to this year. And this is how we spread it across the different programs that we have. These programs have grown as our grantees have grown. We did launch our scholarship program in 2015, so that is now a growing program. But you'll see that the majority of our program spending goes to support our kind of it's actually our from 10th grade to 12th grade after school program that's really focused on getting the young women ready to attend school. So that's been making up on average about 45% of all of our program spending. Going a little bit deeper, as we look at what we've been spending in terms of our operations, this is a chart that really says that explains that. So what I want to draw your attention to is in 2013, all the way through 2016, you'll see a line item called in-kind services. And that actually represents my time. When I first started, Shadhika had no staff, and I didn't get paid at all in the first year. I was completely volunteer, but I was working 3 to 5 days a week in that first year. And as we've gone over time, the board has been trying to compensate me and eliminate the in-kind services that I've been providing, to the point where we now are paying for myself as well as other staff. I was the only staff person until 2016, at which time we began to, I'm sorry, that's not quite right, 2014, and at which time we started to add on more staff. But you'll see also we had contract services in here too, which were short-term contractors. So I think one of the things that you see in how we spend our money is one of our biggest expenses is personnel. And, but I think that in order to be a successful organization, as like many organizations, that's not uncommon, that the cost of talent is one of your biggest costs. And again, this is not in comparison to the, what we do in terms of grant money, but it is in terms of our staff levels. You'll also see in this last year, we have begun to set aside a cash reserve. That's actually a standard of best practice for nonprofits, to be able to have some revenues on hand that is basically, I would call it your rainy day fund. So in case something happened, we have thousands of girls' lives on the other side of the world who are counting on us. And we want to make sure that we have revenues on hand to get us through a rainy day. So right now, our board has been trying to build that cash reserves fund. We currently have enough for 3 months to keep us in business. But if $100,000 dropped out of the sky, our board very well might decide to try to get us to the standard of best practice, which would be a 6 months cash reserve. So that may be how we would allocate some of that windfall revenue if it was to come. Other things on this slide. You'll see we spent a lot on events in 2017, and that again was because it was our 25th anniversary. So we had a big gala in San Francisco. So that was somewhat of an unusual expense. But we have tried to keep most of our expenses static. I guess the other thing that's of note is you'll see that we were working out of my home until 2016. And we've now moved into the Posner Center. And so we are now paying rent on a space, given that we have many staff people. And my husband got very tired of having strangers coming in and out of the house. So the result is that as Shadhika has grown, one thing that we have tried to make sure of is that we hold ourselves accountable to outside evaluators. And these are 3 that have evaluated Shadhika in terms of our financials as well as our governance practices, and have consistently awarded us the highest standard in approval. So we are a platinum for GuideStar, which is the highest rating you can get. We've been approved by the Better Business Bureau, and we have a top-rated standing for the great nonprofits. But that just tells you a lot about the money. I think the most important thing is, what have we done with the money? What's the program impact we're having? So since 2013, we were working in 2 cities, and now we're working in 5 cities. One thing I wanted to share with you is that we have a dashboard of indicators that our board looks at at each one of their quarterly board meetings. And this is the dashboard that we have for our programs. So we have looked at what the Indian average is, where we have those data statistics. We have set ourselves a goal of what we hope to achieve. And then on an annual basis, we look at our impact to that goal. So this is how we did in comparison to our goals in 2017. We'll do the same every year. Our grantee partners for this year will submit their grant reports in the first quarter of next year, and we'll use those to assess our programs. The other thing that we are looking to do in 2019 is to actually hire an outside evaluator of all of our programs. That will be done for the first time, just because, again, we want to really get an outside opinion on what's working, what's not working, and how we can improve our performance. So since 2014, we've served almost 5,000 young women, and we expect this to increase. We project 1,600 in this coming year, but it's quite possible we'll have served additional young women. And since 2014, we've served 1,500 young men. Again, this is a program that really didn't start until 2016. So in 2014, it was a little bit higher, but we were kind of sorting out some legacy grantees that we had. So we're really starting to grow that, and that's working with young men on gender-based violence issues. And since 2015, when the program started, we're now this year sending, let's see, how many is that? It's 20, 30, 41, almost 41 women to college. And we continue to grow that program. Through all of our programs, we are ensuring that young women are escaping from child marriage, which was one of the core tenets of our program, as well as graduating from class 12. So you'll see that we're at 99%. Pretty much every young woman who enters our program at this point, basically we're finding the programs we support almost has 100% elimination of child marriage, which is quite amazing. We are seeing child marriage rates in India decline in general overall. When I first started this job in 2014, the rate was 47% was the last rate, and now UNICEF just released a report this year. Then it's now at 73%. So that's great progress. The same thing with school. I'm very proud of the fact that the young women that we're working with are graduating from high school. As some of you know, that it costs money to go to school in India, especially for class 11 and class 12, which is considered kind of pre-college, if you will. And so a lot of young women do not finish past class 10. Many don't finish past class 8. But as we're seeing, we have about a 90% graduation rate. In addition, against some of the other indicators that we have, we're still working on girls that are, reporting. We're not quite at goal for girls that are reporting a change in their rights knowledge. We're working with our grantee partners to understand where the issues are in kind of the retention of that, because that seems to be a quality of what they're learning. And then also for young men. And we have seen an interesting phenomenon with the young men we serve, in that a lot of times they'll understand that it's a girl's right to get an education, but they won't understand that it's not okay to hit a woman. That is still something that is widely accepted. So that's another area that we're really trying to work on. And then just some other indicators that came out of our 2017 evaluation. 95% are passing their supplemental English courses, which is really an important milestone in order for them to continue on to college, which is all conducted in English, or to work in the formal economy in India, which is also primarily conducted in English. I think this is a great one, that 92% of them feel an increased confidence to live independently. 89% of the women of age are registered to vote. That's another indicator we're working to get up. And 45% have their own bank account, and that's slightly higher than the Indian average. So looking forward, I thought it would be good to just do a little forecasting of what we're looking for in the next 5 years. This first 5 years, if I was going to kind of give it a synopsis, I would say it was really to test our theory of change in terms of investing in girls over the long term and creating kind of change agents for gender equality. I think it was also this last 5 years was about building Shadhika's infrastructure to be a functioning and robust nonprofit. Looking forward, we want to scale. So what we're really saying is that by 2030, we want to support and empower 10,000 young women leaders throughout India. So that's kind of our new big, hairy, audacious goal that we're setting for ourselves. And we're really looking forward to having you all be a part of making that happen. That means we really want to try to locate one partner NGO that we work with in every single state in India. So taking it from the states where we're based now in Karnataka, Maharashtra, Delhi, and West Bengal, and really expanding to every single state. So that begins to be our strategy looking forward, is to build a national network of girl change agents in every state in India. And how we're going to do that is by investing in these change agents. We believe that the girls have the desire to be the change they wish to see in the world, and what they're only missing is the opportunity to realize those aspirations. And that's really the role of Shadhika. If we can only do one thing in the United States, we can provide resources through financial resources as well as support through mentoring to really help unlock the drive of these amazing young women. So as I mentioned, we'll continue our 10 through 12 after school support to make sure that the girls are receiving the education they need to be able to finish secondary school and get ready and prepared for college. We want to expand our Shadhika scholarship program so that we are really empowering many, many more young women to be able to go to college. We've had an amazing success with that program, and we really think it's becoming a signature program for Shadhika. From those young women receiving scholarships, we will begin actually in 2019 hosting an annual Girls Leadership Summit where they will have, it's a week-long intensive in-residence summit where they'll learn leadership skills. They'll be exposed to mentors from throughout India, women mentors. We will be awarding the scholarship based on community service. So part of what the summit will be an award ceremony on girls' projects for community service and for advancing girls' rights. I always like to think of it a little bit as an AmeriCorps program. So in exchange for receiving a scholarship with Shadhika, they are also being asked to give back to their community and at the summit recognized for that work. And then finally, upon completion of college, as they're getting ready to make the transition, there will be another kind of intensive for second and third year college students where they will get what they will learn about job placements and hopefully be able to connect with employers from throughout India for begin to look for job placements and jobs. And then, of course, the ongoing alumni network. So that's basically where we are thinking of heading. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take you off mute. And I will do that so you can all jump in. And hopefully that will not get completely crazy. So Alex, I am going to mute you because you're in my room. Same with Claire. So I don't know if any of you have any questions or things you'd like to go back to. No, it's clear as mud.
Kim, I had one question. This is Reena Kapoor. Is there a shift in spending that you're anticipating because of what you're doing, or are you pretty much looking at how, continuing with what sort of has worked well with the expansion in the centers that you're planning? I would assume that there's some more infrastructure spending that you're looking at, but I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah.
What you're thinking about.
Yeah, so I would say actually we're just getting, our board is meeting in 2 weeks to go over our budget for 2019. And in terms of infrastructure for the coming year, it's been about 5 years since we've done our website, and technology has changed a lot. So we will be making an investment in that. As I mentioned, we'll be making an investment in an outside evaluation, it being a strategic planning year. But really, I'm guessing that as we grow our programs in India, we hired a program officer in India this year. And I think as those programs begin to scale in India, we'll be needing additional staff in India. The good news is that the job rates in India are, the employment costs in India are significantly lower than they are in the United States. But I think we will be adding staff in our program areas. That I would probably project over the next 5 years. I don't know how much more changes there will be in terms of our operations here in the United States. Again, it could be as we scale and do more kind of donor engagement, we bring some people on to help with that. But and I guess there's the cost of, if we have additional people, we're already at capacity here in the office space we have in Posner, but these would be minor things. So I think it would be, my feeling at this point is we've made the investments to stabilize our infrastructure as an organization, and that the next period will really be about program expansion and expanding our footprint, and costs that we incur will be related to that.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Remind that many of you look like you're on mute, so just remember to unmute yourself if you want to answer a question. Any comments? I know I have my treasurer on the line. I'm not going to on the call as well. I'm not sure if she wants to weigh in and share anything about from her point of view in terms of Shadhika's investments. I don't want to put her on the spot, but I see that she's on.
Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Everybody. This is Aruna. I really think that the way you focused on, since you came on board and how things changed from an event in the backyard and the investments that we've made, I think you focused all of us on that very well and set the stage for what you showed for the future years. I think that's exactly sort of the thinking that we go through at board meetings and executive committee meetings.
Great, thanks, Aruna.
This is Alan. I would just like to add, in comparison to the other not-for-profits that I see of your size, I think you've done an excellent job in the transparency that you have, because normally, I don't see an audit of organizations your size. Usually it's a lower service of outside accounting that I see. So number one, I think that will pay you dividends regarding future donors by having the transparency of an audit. And two is, I think, developing and keeping your dashboards current is really key to measuring the effectiveness of the organization.
So Alan, this is Aruna. It's really interesting that you brought that up, because we had the similar discussion of the audit cost being really something. Do we want to do that? And as I said earlier, it was sort of an investment towards the future growth, and it's really nice to hear that that's something from a comparison standpoint. It was really nice to hear your comment. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to draw your attention to that, the 27, you begin to see the audit costs in 2017 and in 2018, where we actually are incurring some of those audit costs. So that's kind of the leap in the management in general that you see there. I just want to go back to the questions and make sure that we answered everything. I think that we did. I think the one. Yeah, I think that we got everything. Is there any other questions that anybody else has? I hope this was helpful. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we will go ahead and cede you back your 20 minutes for the remainder of this call. We have recorded this session and we will make it available on the web. So, if you want to go back to it and refer to it, we will be publishing kind of quarterly investor calls that probably will be 30 minutes to 45 minutes where we can go over kind of what's happened in the previous quarter, and you can continue to be engaged. But I want to thank Alan for taking the time to be with us today, and I want to thank all of you as well for being with us today. It was great to have you on the line, and thank you for your continued support of Shadhika. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. That was really nice. And thanks, Alan.
My pleasure.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.